Hello and welcome to this SwiftUI video. In this video, I'm going to show you how to keep data in sync using bindings throughout your whole app without any lots of hacking and so on. So with that said, before we start showing you the code, I'm just going to show you what I'm talking about. So we've got all of the JSON placeholder users listed here. And then this next tab view is basically showing all of the addresses for each of those users. And then we have another copy of the users here because I want to be able to show you that they're all sharing the same data. And when you make a change to the address or make a change to the user, they're all going to get updated instantaneously. Okay. And so this is not using any magic. This is just simply using binding, and that is it, and published as well. So when we come into Leanne Graham in here, all right, and then when we come into the address here, we can see that we've got apartment 556 and Kulas Light. So let's come back to here and let's add Kulas Light 1, and let's go to base users, and we can see Kulas Light 1 is already been updated on base users, and come back to here, you can see Kulas 1 has been updated on the users, and Kulas Light 1 is here. So we've basically, by updating it on the form, we haven't got any save buttons, and you can see that it all gets updated nice and easily. And when we come into this base users as well, and we update Leanne Graham, come back to here, you can see everything is getting updated. Come back to here, nice and simple, all right? And we remove it, and we come to then the address, and we update the address and come back again. Everything gets updated super simple without any hacking. So with that said, I'm now going to show you how I wrote the code. And we're not going to code it, all right? I'm just going to show you exactly how I managed to do this. So just as a point of interest, I've created this JSON placeholder package that's just on my GitHub. It's private, but it's just there to mean that I don't have to rewrite this code over and over again. And we've got two generic function here, get placeholder resource for a simple entity, and then all of the entities here, just nice and simple, quick and easy to use in the code. So the landing view, the content view, is a tab view, as you can see, with users, addresses, and base user here. Base users, addresses, and user list. And as I said, the user list here are both exactly the same. They just have different titles. So here we can see that we're using a state object here at the highest level of user view model. We'll come in to have a look at the user view model. Remember, this is a view model, so we are allowing some form of view information in here, and our view should just be the thing that's displaying it. Our view model can do a little bit of business logic here. As you can see, we're not using views in here, we're just using business logic in here. And binding, yes, it falls under SwiftUI, but that's part of the framework. And so, but we're only here with data, we're not here with views. So we have a published of users, and when we call load, which we call load with inside of the user list here, if the user list is empty, then we'll go ahead and we'll download all of the resources. We'll save it into the published users array. And that will be it. So we're only going to load them once, all right? And the bindable user and bindable address, they're both taking a user ID here. And the bindable user is obviously returning a bindable user. And it's not an optional user, because when we call this, we're going to know that we've already had this ID. So we're not going to be just placing a random ID in here. It's got to have come from this one array. So we know that it's exists. And that means for both bindable user and bindable address. I'm not a fan of false unwrapping, but a little bit of discipline within inside of your codes to say this function should only be called, this method should only be called in the event that you actually had a user from this published users here instead. No deep linking, all right? So this function should not be used with any deep linking or universal links because you just don't know whether it did or didn't exist. So for that reason, you would need some other code to go off to the JSON placeholder website, download it, populate this one users in here, and then use this one bindable user instead, right? So you know that you have manually inserted it. Now that we have this bindable user, bindable address, you can see here that we are just filtering out the first user on both occasions here. And once we've got that one user, on the first one, we are returning that one user. And on the second one, we're returning only the address here. Remember, the address and the users, they are structs. It's all structs. So they're always being passed by value, okay? But when we set our the properties here, all we're doing is we are mapping through, iterating through the users, and we are changing we are updating that user with the new value or just the initial value, the current value that's there. And we're doing the same with the addresses. However, once we get the user, we're making a copy of it. Because we want to be able to change it, because this is a constant at the moment, we are changing the address, and then we are returning that one user with the updated address. So these values here are talking directly to this one array. So we are never using anything else, but this is our source of truth. So there's no individual user states or anything like that. The only thing that we do have is when we're in the user list, for example, we go into this user detail. And this is what's important. So the user list is just iterating through all of the users as normal users. Okay, these are not bindable or anything like that, just normal users. And we use a navigation link. Remember, this is passed by value. This is not a reference type. So when we call navigation link and it calls this destination, this is a copy of this one because they're structs. So we can't create a binding to this because it's not the same user, right? This has lost all reference now to the published. And so we have to come back to this user detail and we have to rebind it. So we have to go to the publish and say, hey, give me this new binding. Now we could create some form of publisher and so on, but I don't want that. I just want a direct, we wanted user detail, wanted user list. I want a direct binding to that one user, and I don't want the user detail, if we go inside it, to have to do any combine. I don't want combine in here. I just want it to show the user, and that's it. That's why we are using a binding here. We haven't got any initializers, we haven't got any extra business logic in here. It's nice and clean, all right? So it means this user detail we can show only if and only it has a user to display. And so it shows the name here. We could put the other items there as well, but it also shows then the address. The navigation link to this one can take a binding, all right? Because we know that this user has a binding. This binding goes directly to this published here, all right? It's direct because it's attached to here, okay? So any updates are going to be updated directly to this published var users. So within inside of the user detail, we can pass now a binding onto the address detail as normal because we know this is a safe binding. And so when we come into the address detail, now the address struct does also have another property of the geo. So you would need to enhance this even further for the geo parts of it. And maybe I might make an additional video to show you how to go even further and what logic you would have to do. But I just wanted to show you this is how we can keep all of the business logic of the binding all the way at the highest level. Instead, it means that at your view model, yes, you are updating your published here, but this publish could be within inside of a service or a repository or a store or somewhere else. It doesn't have to live inside of this user view model. It could be elsewhere. But for the sake and purposes of simplicity in this one video, we are keeping it within inside of this one view model itself. So I hope this gives you an insight to how you can use the bindings. I see lots of people talking about having like an optional states and so on, which is okay, but you really want a view to have its data. Only show a detail view if it has that information. So it means load the data elsewhere and let the state of that one view update and then show a detail. But you've got to be careful about how you pass these bindings on, because when you've got structs, remember they are value types, and if you don't have an explicit binding around specific properties, you are going to get passed by value, but you need pass by reference all the time. You need something updating the source of truth, and in this situation the source of truth is this published here. So as long as you know whatever level, like I said, the sub properties of address is geo. As long as you know every single update to that one binding is accessing this one user directly, then you are okay. But if you don't know that, then there could be other side effects here. It could only be updating the address, but not updating the user at a higher level. Maybe I'll make an extension to this one video to show you how to do that as well. Most programming problems always start at an architectural level, all right? If you start looking at the imperative level, as in the code that you've got to write at the smallest level, you're going to have problems. You need to take a step back. And normally you can solve these things at an architectural level and then work out, okay, how can I pass the data down? And SwiftUI is all about composition, all right? It is not about imperative code. If you want imperative code, do UI kit. But you can sometimes merge this together. When you're on an architectural level, you're on an imperative level. But when you're on a UI level, this is where you're on a declarative level. And that's where the composition comes into it. Make the views as small as possible, because in SwiftUI, they are as cheap as possible, which means we can have at our business logic level, where all the code's done, the view models, the repositories, the stores, that's where we can do all the heavy lifting and let SwiftUI just show the views super, super easy. But we want the source of truth always. Remember, the source of truth is who owns the data. And in this example, the user view model owns it because it has this published. And when we come down to the address detail and the user detail, they all have a binding to a user. And this is saying, hey, I don't own the data. Someone else owns the data, but I can manipulate it, all right? And the question is who is behind the manipulation? And when we go back down to the address detail, when we pass that further, we are passing a binding to that one address, okay? And so we need to understand who is the one having this, who is the one editing this, who is one updating, who's the one managing it, and so on. So try not to use this if let's binding here, and I'm talking about if let's like binding equals binding. If this user was optional, right? If this user was optional, then you could have like a binding like address here, for example. Okay, this would, let's put it in there. This would work because you've got an optional user. And then this one doesn't work now, but you've got an optional user, but you're creating a binding. And if this binding does work, then we're always passing on a reference to this one user and so on. But I much prefer to use business logic, a little bit of intelligence to stop the binding from having to be an optional, and you can just extract that business logic outside of the user detail and only show the user detail when you have a user instead. So that's the whole point of composition, is only show this one user detail. And if you're in a user list or you've universal linked in there, you've deep linked into it, load it first and then show the user detail. Don't let the user detail don't let the user detail be the source of truth for that one data, because if your user detail has a state to this one user, that means that it owns this one data, all right? It's the owner, but that's not true. A view doesn't own the data. A view model or a repository or a store owns the data. And the view should just be borrowing it. It should just have a direct link to it through a binding. And that is it. So try and decouple this thought of views should have states. Right, views should have bindings, and the view model should have the published. And then when you start looking at the other observable things, that's something different. But that's only as of iOS 17, and I'm sure you're going to have to work on views or applications that are older than iOS 17. So with that said, I hope that you've got something out of this one video. I hope you like this one video. I hope you've learned something from this one video. If you did, don't forget to like, subscribe, share, and do all of the other social media things out there that you can do. If you've got any questions, feedback, or concerns, or any enhancements to this one thing, I'm more than happy to listen to it, and I will make a continuation from this one video, more than likely anyway, to add the coordinates on to it as well. With that said, thank you very much for watching. My name's David Thorne, and I will see you in the next video. Ciao, ciao, and goodbye.